Well, here we are on another sunny day in Lancaster, one of many, just an uncountable number of days of endless sunshine stretching ahead of us from now on. And
indeed,
and as
it's
always,
exciting, Mark. 24 degrees at the weekend.
Really, right?
So you'll be able to go out and do your thing and
Yes, possibly.
and get a bit of a tan and.
Well, it'll be make a change. So we're on the 20th episode of our intrepid journey through the sun is shining, but
Before we continue, Mark, I've been meaning to ask you this. Have you had a?
I was about to develop a metaphor about clouds and sunshine, but never mind.
Carry on, please.
No, it's over now.
Well, we can come back to it.
The moment's gone. I was feeling metaphorical, but it's
right. Okay.
past.
Well, maybe there's a silver lining somewhere.
Excellent.
Have you had a bit of a chop?
Yeah, have you?
Last week.
Really? Right. Well, it's very fetching.
Thank you very much. It's looking very, very stylish, very dishevelled.
Dishevelled. Oh well, it's a bit windy outside. I've been talking to Chris McLeod. I'll get makeup to.
I think it's a look that people are going for though.
Right. Okay.
A messed up look.
Excellent.
Messy. I mean, when I had hair back in the day, it was a look that.
Wow.
Well, I had curly hair, so it was sort of naturally of that type.
Yeah. Well, the images that pass through my head of you with hair,
Well, one day I will show you, Mark.
Right. Look forward to it. Anyway, and you're making a cultural statement.
I am.
Which is, I think, just posing, isn't it? Because you don't like AC/DC.
I like AC/DC from time to time.
Well, there you are, but that's not enough to justify the T-shirt.
Well, it was a gift.
Ah, well.
So
somebody cares.
Somebody cares.
So,
indeed.
what's on the packed agenda today,
Lots
Simon?
of things, Mark. Lots of
Good.
things. So we're going to talk a bit about the World Cup.
Ah.
We're going to talk a bit about Brexit, obviously.
Briefly.
We'll have a discussion of some North Korea stuff and some human rights.
Yes.
And then probably touch on Yemen.
Right.
On the subject of human rights.
Should we do the Brexit first? We'll do boring, interesting, boring, interesting.
Okay, I'll let you pick which is which then.
Well, Brexit is boring because there was a vote yesterday in the House of Commons. Well, the vote was about whether Parliament would have a meaningful vote, a meaningful say in the event of our crack team of, and I said crack rather than team of negotiators. If they come back from
CK, not a P.
If they come back from their perilous journey to the court of the Wizard King, whatever, in Brussels, if they come back with no deal, then, and they report back to Parliament, there's got to be a meaningful vote. Parliament's got to be able to judge, to kind of, I suppose, in a way, the danger is actually pass judgment, hold them accountable for their performance in the negotiations.
Stop that. Oh. Before we carry on, I want to talk about this journey. I'm imagining these intrepid explorers setting off with a wonderful fanfare with the nation behind them.
Well, the nation spoke.
Going to Europe to see what they can do.
Aye.
It's coming home. Oh no, I'm thinking football. But tell us about this. These are who exactly? Who are we talking about?
Well, David Davis and a team. I mean, obviously, with all these things, the spade work is really done by civil servants. The problem is whether those civil servants are singing from the same hymn sheet as Mr. Davis, and certainly some senior figures are clearly more amenable to remain.
And when do we see Mr. Davis and his crack team sailing off down the Thames from Parliament?
Oh no, they're there.
They've gone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We didn't see it. Well, we didn't have a state lawn.
No, well, there are some officials who are there permanently. I mean, we have our permanent representation at the Court of the Mountain King or whatever.
Wow.
And Mr. Davis just flies in to have a row or to occasionally show a bit of bromance with the a bit like Trump and Kim kind of thing. So
anyway, yes.
So I was going to say, hold them accountable. It's a journey. You are going on a journey.
When do they return?
Well, the things will probably go at the negotiations. We've got the cut-off date, of course, is March of next year, and so you keep asking me about dates. I just kind of think, well, it's going to be kicked endlessly down the road. A phrase I've used many times, and we don't need to really finalise things finally. But if you've got a transition phase, then you can go in. What you really are doing is negotiating what things are going to be like in the transition phase. You're still not really negotiating what's going to happen in the long run. And as I say, I think the real cut-off date probably is the date of the next general election or around there, because that's when, but the Conservatives obviously don't want the moment of truth to occur at a time which might result in the end of their government rather prematurely. Anyway, so
Yes,
yeah,
okay.
so the House of Lords said that Parliament must have a say if there is no deal. The House of Commons kicked out that amendment by the House of Lords, the European Withdrawal Act, or whatever it'll become. The House of Lords then promptly did a slightly different amendment, which was slightly more cunning and more designed to make sure the Remainers in the House of Commons all voted for it. In the meantime, there's supposed to be a kind of deal between the government and the Remainers in the Conservative Party, which was really tantamount to a promise that there would be a meaningful
And that was what we discussed
vote
last week.
Yeah. Then there was allegations. This is so endlessly turgid or dancing on the head of a pin, really. But the government was supposed to have reneged on its deal with the Remainers. There's an awful lot of fuss about that. And then again yesterday, there seems to have been a similar agreement behind the scenes that there would really be a meaningful vote. So the Remainers are saying we're happy to either vote with the government or abstain. Some, of course, voted against. Ken Clark et al. Disobeyed the whip anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's left everything exactly. And I think what I said last week. It's a different sort of scene of a long-running farce. In which, in the end, Parliament is bound to have a say on this because, as I say, if the government comes back with a deal which Parliament decides it doesn't like, then there'll be a vote of no confidence in the government, which can be held, very easily. And all you need is the numbers, basically, and you can either choose an issue to make it a vote of confidence that the government just has lost its mandate to govern in the House of Commons, or officially the opposition can call a vote of confidence.
Okay.
So this is all, as much as anything, I think what the government is trying to do is to work out what the arithmetic is in the House of Commons at the moment. Okay. And that's on a knife edge, really.
So Mark, I've got another question, just from this, kind of Brexit related, but more generally. It seems that the government's responsibility is to try and regulate political life, improve the quality of life for people living in the UK. Fundamentally.
Okay, that would be news to them, but all right.
Well, that's the point, right?
Well, if they want to be re-elected, then one might say that the imposition of austerity suggests rather a different job for government. But
the point is that there's all of this debate about Brexit. There's all of these discussions. What space is there? I mean, it's kind of limited here.
Right.
What space is there for normal everyday politics? The impact of austerity, the impact that that this is having on everyday people, the cuts to every facet of life.
Well, yeah, but these things are raised, but mainly by Jeremy Corbyn at Prime Minister's Question Time. Again, the government's majority with the DUP's assistance is enough to make sure that kind of thing, if it's debate, the Labour can raise issues whenever it wants. It's got time allocated every week to when Parliament is sitting, and so it raises these issues, but the government's got the numbers. It's just, Brexit is taking so much time because there's a doubt about whether the government has got the numbers or not. Right. Anyway, so it's a long-running saga, and nothing
seems to be
changes.
shutting down all of the space for normal politics.
Well, there is no normal politics, but there are things, obviously, at the moment, proposed legislation on intrusions on women in particular, obscene photographs taken without the consent of women, that kind of thing is still going on. It's just it doesn't quite get the headlines to the extent that Brexit does. So it hasn't crowded out the parliamentary agenda, but it has, it's obviously occupying the media, and it's infringing on. But the thing about this government, it didn't win a secure mandate, and therefore it really doesn't have any. There was a programme implicit in Mrs May's manifesto, which was very much Mrs May's manifesto, but that's all for the birds now because she didn't win a mandate.
I have a suggestion. I think she should go back to the general public, call another election, and try and increase the mandate.
Yeah, that would be a great idea, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That's what she should have... Oh. Now I see what happened.
Yeah. Good. So, anyway, so there we are. That's Brexit. But should we do the interesting stuff now?
Okay.
World Cup.
We're a week in.
We are, as we speak. We should hold up a newspaper to prove...
Oh, yes. this is Thursday, I believe.
It is. It's the 21st.
Yes,
Yeah.
21st. So we're a week in. First round of games is done. We're into the second round.
We made lots of predictions. I've forgotten what they were, but I think they were all spot on as usual.
I think so. Yeah, we're bang on.
Yeah, I predicted Mexico would beat Germany. Off camera, but
off camera.
you know,
yeah. I still think that Germany will win the World Cup, but
all right, you heard it here first.
yeah, you did. If they can sort out their midfield. But I think what's interesting is that there's been this real festival of sport and coming together in Russia. I mean,
Yeah.
off the pitch, the fans are getting together. We see this interaction of cultures. There's a wonderful story of the Japan-Colombia game where the Japanese fans were clearing up after themselves in the stadium, which is what Japanese culture tells them to do.
Yeah.
And seeing this, the Colombian fans decided to do the very same thing.
Wow.
Which is excellent. It's a beautiful nod to sort of the coming together of cultures.
Yeah.
There are fans of all teams meeting on the streets, and rather than in the previous European tournament meeting on the
in
streets
combat.
in combat, they were meeting and playing football.
Yeah.
Which
You
is a
couldn't make
novel
it up.
idea at a World Cup, but it seems to be going well. It seems to be a celebration of sport rather than a real sort of political hotbed that many were fearing.
Yeah, and who better to host such a
of course.
festival than Russia? And it could be, is it perhaps the case then that there was so much talk that the Russian authorities would crack down severely on any... And also the other thing, of course, is that Russia are doing really well as we speak with 2 wins in their pocket.
Well, that helps.
But that everyone was so petrified of putting a foot out of place that they've decided to, maybe there's an angel of my better nature or whatever, and I'm going to start tapping into my nice self. And then I'll go home and beat the crap out of anyone I see.
Well, I mean, that's possibly one way of viewing things.
But I wouldn't. But the other thing I find interesting is how the cameras, the camera instructions have been to focus on attractive female fans, and they all look really enthusiastic. But it does seem a little bit kind of tokenistic or whatever. But what they're trying to do, I guess, is to say that everyone can enjoy this sport. There are very few pictures, close-ups of men enjoying the sport, but even so, attractive females can enjoy the sport as well.
It is a little bit more crude than in other tournaments, where similar things have happened. And I mean, it's a little uncomfortable, I think.
It is, but they do look like they are genuine fans in that they're cheering in you know, they're synchronised with action.
So you don't think that they're plants?
Well, the thought did cross my mind, but
they're human.
Well, they're certainly not plants in that sense, like the plant that's no longer.
But it's living and doing well.
Yeah. Anyway, so good. Any predictions? There's today upcoming. There's Argentina versus somebody or other.
Croatia.
That should be
2-1.
Right, 2-1-2.
Croatia.
Wow! Get your money on 5 days after it happened. And of course the US Open, Brooks Koepka, our Tommy Fleetwood from Southport came second.
Fleetwood from Southport.
Well, yeah.
Confusing.
And so that was me happy anyway.
Excellent.
I watched plucky Iran. Were you cheering for Iran?
I was cheering for Iran.
Yeah, I mean the first half
VAR or VAR or
but in the first half they showed the kind of decadent Western trend of play acting virtually all the time, and then the second half they played really well and lost. But good. So on to, you were going to talk about North Korea.
Well, yeah, just a little follow-up from last week. We were talking about, was it last week or the week before? But anyway, we were talking about the summit.
We're talking about summit.
We'll talk about the summit, lad.
Aye.
And the nuclear summit between the two, and this big celebration of success. This big historic.
Should have taken place in Russia.
Peaceful moment. Two sides coming together, long-standing rivals, working towards the denuclearization of a region, the Korean Peninsula. We're still waiting for pretty much anything to happen.
Yes.
There's been no real talk about what the next steps are. There's been no real talk about what the North Koreans are going to do, and how they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it by.
Yeah.
So, sure, it's a wonderful success and something that Mr. Trump should be very proud of.
Oh yes.
But I mean, there are questions as to, well, What is he proud of?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, but the interesting thing there is, of course, that he denounced or reneged on the Iran deal because it was too vague, and the promises were not.
Well, the issue with the Iran deal, just quickly on a bit of a tangent, was there were doubts as to whether the US was getting the best possible deal out of it. That was one interpretation, but the other was that the deal didn't do enough to curb Iranian support for proxy actors across the region. It didn't do enough to prevent Iran from emboldening groups like Hezbollah, the Lebanese Party of God, and other places like that. So there was a thought that the deal was actually increasing tensions, increasing violence across the region, rather than working to decrease it. Now that's maybe a longer discussion for another time.
Right.
But,
okay. I thought I was, playing your game there by saying Mr. Trump's guilty of double standards, because he's just agreed to something very vague, whereas just denounced something that was very vague. But clearly, Mr. Trump is perfectly consistent that one deal is potentially good and the other one was bad.
Well, depending who you ask.
Yes.
But on the subject of double standards, Mark, this is a very smooth segue.
Thank you.
There was some big news yesterday, commented on by our very own James Sweeney in law, friend of the show, friend of the Institute.
The Sweeney, our Sweeney in law. That's what we'll call him from now on.
I like that. That's good. That can be a hashtag. Sweeney in law.
Sweeney in law.
So yeah, he went on a couple of news channels to talk about the US withdrawal from the Human Rights Council. So, what's your take on this, Mark? The US has said, Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo have said, look, we've urged the council to reform. We've said there is double standards. We've said that there is too much focus on Israel, and there is a standing article, Article 7, which calls for an investigation into Israeli actions in Gaza and the West Bank. But they have accused the Human Rights Council of paying scant attention to events in Iran, in Venezuela, and
North Korea, maybe.
And
not Russia, obviously, because Russia, according to well, I mean, obviously, again, Mr. Trump is playing to his domestic audience as ever, and what's happening here is, short of the, as it were, nuclear option of pulling out of the UN entirely, or of pulling out all funding from the UN, what you're doing is wielding a big stick against the UN in what I guess they've worked out is the area in which they've got the best case for doing so.
The Human Rights Council is deeply problematic.
Yeah,
there's little doubt about that. When you have, was it last year or the year before, the council was led by Saudi Arabia, at the vanguard of human rights and improving quality of life for women in the kingdom. But obviously there are issues. Now the question is, do you try and reform something from within and standing as a member, sitting on that council and trying to reform it from within, or do you say, you know what, we've had enough, we're going to take our ball and we're going to go home? Well,
according to the Trump administration, they've tried the first option, and it hasn't worked. So, yeah. And but the other thing about the double standards is that virtually the same headline, the headline saying US pulls out of the Human Rights Court, then there's the stories about Mexican children being held in what could be called cages. Slightly unfortunate juxtaposition, and of course Mr. Trump has announced a change of policy on this issue, that the whole families will now be kept in cages or something like that, to create a family atmosphere, and a cage of their very own.
It shows that whilst there are these wonderful ideals of human rights, when you put them into geopolitical context, those ideals are somewhat ephemeral, if you will.
Yeah, well, so who's without sin cast the first stone, I think. But there couldn't have been, apart from Guantanamo Bay, this would have to be the worst human rights story that's come out of America in my lifetime. About Vietnam, etc.
Well, I think there's potentially a broader one in terms of the structural racism featuring the black population of America and the targeted or seemingly targeted killing of black Americans by police officers. But that is a much bigger, much more structural aspect that isn't one sole story, but
but this is a deliberate policy. There is no deliberate policy
Sure.
that black people should be targeted by police officers, even though there might be a tacit understanding that that happens. But in this case, it's like saying somebody is given an order for the treatment, for the separation of children from their families, and thinking of things like the European Convention of Human Rights, that's specified that families shouldn't
the
be
right to a
separated.
family
But not only are the families separated, they're also being kept in barbaric, seemingly barbaric circumstances. So you know what you've done is just taken any Convention of Human Rights and not so much breached it, has driven a steamroller through it.
Well, it really does give weight to what Sweeneyan law, or our Sweeneyan law, said on I think France 24, where he said, it's a wonderful pronunciation.
It is.
Where he said
Flawless.
that there is one less human rights abuser on the Human Rights Council.
Yeah, well, that's a very harsh thing. But again, if you look around the world, you might identify states which don't abuse human rights. But again, this thing about without sin, casting a stone. But anyway, so that's the point. Once again, and this is happening. But things happen so quickly between our episodes that the war of words, at any rate, about trade and tariffs, that has been ratcheted up. Stock markets reacted very badly to Mr. Trump basically saying, more sanctions against China, with the ultimate, I think, idea that in the end, because there's a trade imbalance, as we all know, that in the end the US has more things to put tariffs on than the Chinese do in retaliation. So, but the other thing you might say is that some of the things that the Chinese government might target in retaliation would be consumer goods, high prestige consumer goods, the kind of thing that the incipient rising Chinese middle class actually want. And so, it could be this thing about who wins trade wars, and the answer is nobody does. But again, with all these moves, you could see that there's a crazed rationale behind it, that it might cause a great deal of destruction, but in the end, America will win. And there was an America First rally, I think, last night, just showing that this message is still resonating in some parts of not just the Republican Party, the country as a whole.
Right. The other story that I think we need to touch on, Mark, and time is rapidly disappearing again, but I think we need to talk about Yemen.
Right, oh yes, good, on home ground for you.
We need
this
to
is a home question.
It is, I'll take it. We need to talk about what's happening in Hudaybiya.
Right, we do.
The port city in Yemen that is currently under siege by Saudi and Emirati-led forces in an attempt to rid the city and to regain control of the port from Houthi rebels. Now, that it's a latest battle in a almost 4-year conflict that has decimated Yemen. But the reason why it's important for us right now, and important to flag up, is that of Yemen's population of about 28-29 million, it's estimated that 22 million people are in dire need of aid in Yemen, and 70 to 80% of that aid comes through this port.
Right.
Comes through the Hudaybiya port. So, if there is conflict in the city and around the port area, which there will be, because the Saudi and Emirati forces are trying to get control of the port, they're trying to stop what they see to be Iranian weapons coming into the port to support the Houthis. If they do that, if there is this fighting, then a huge percentage of the country's aid is going to be stuck outside.
Yeah.
There is a huge humanitarian crisis brewing. So I mentioned the 22 million people who are in dire need of aid. 8.4 million people are on the brink of starvation. If this aid does not get in, there is going to be a catastrophic, devastating crisis. 8.4 million people on the verge of starvation. That's not to say anything about the 650,000 people who live in the city who are going to be caught up in urban warfare, which, as we've seen across the past 15-20 years, is brutal, devastating, disruptive in terms of daily life, in terms of the ability of children to go to school, people to go to their jobs, healthcare. There's an economic dimension. serious human rights abuses, of course, taking place. So this is a serious crisis that, once again, has been overlooked.
Yeah, well, by us until the very end of our. I mean, that kind of thing is such a huge story that it's kind of mind-boggling in its scope, but also it's the kind of thing that you would imagine it's like too big to unfold. In other words, you know, that there's so much there, human life and suffering at stake, that you would imagine that it could be the focus of a deal, could it not? You know,
well,
that it could actually concentrate minds.
You would hope. I fear that this won't happen. I'm not particularly a big believer in diplomacy working in Yemen.
Right, okay.
I'm a big fan of diplomacy generally, but I think in the Yemeni case there are so many competing agendas, so many intra-factional issues, that means that it's really difficult for sides themselves to come to an agreement as to what their demands are before they even get to the negotiating table.
Right.
So I fear it's really difficult, but something has to be done to prevent catastrophic loss of life, both in the city, but also broader across Yemen, with the huge amount of aid that needs to get in the country. This is a country that is running out of food. This is a country that is, in the longer term, but not the too distant future, running out of water.
Yeah.
So there are serious issues facing Yemen, and something has to be done.
Yeah. But meanwhile, the World Cup can play, and Saudi Arabia is there, and Iran is there. Thankfully, not in the same group. Which I mean, the group of death used to be a phrase bandied around rather glibly. Yeah. So, but the other thing, of course, again, certainly Western media doesn't seem to be particularly focusing on this problem.
No, not particularly. I mean, as we've said earlier on, the UK media is dominated by Brexit
and the World Cup. So,
which does cut down on space, and then what little space there is left has to focus on the issues of the UK, but it shouldn't exclude such other issues such as Yemen.
Yeah, but there, again, like with the Syria thing, that it tended to come in and out of the headlines when there was a human story attached to it, when there was a refugee who was, you know, particularly photogenic or whatever. No.
I mean, let's not forget the Syrian crisis is still happening.
Oh, well,
there is still a war in Syria.
Yeah. Yes. Good. Well, it's a sunny day, and you've certainly cheered me up, Simon.
Well, you're very welcome.
It's
glad to have done my bit for the cause.
Yeah. No, that's deep, and you know, I have to confess that I didn't realise that this particular incident was happening, although I was aware of the proxy war that's going on in Yemen, and that's the kind of thing that really ought to be given more coverage in the mainstream press, which we of course transcend with our wider perspective on horror and death and suffering. Good.
Book of the week?
I'm not in the mood now.
Right, okay. Well, maybe we should just leave it there then.
No, you've got a book of the week.
Well,
I know you have.
I was reading a recent book by... I say a recent book.
Yeah, you were recently reading a book.
Recently, by Majid Kaduri, looking at political ideas and ideals in the Arab world from 1970.
It's a book which, if we had it here, would look something like this, side on.
Indeed. I'll bring it next week.
Artist's impression. Yeah, that's the trouble with Book of the Week, but this is a book about, you know, what you might say it's got enduring relevance.
It certainly does.
Yeah. Although it was published in 1970, the roots of Arab nationalism, etc., the cross currents of maybe religious.
Yeah, we'll tweet the
bring
reference.
it in. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Hashtag Sweeney-in-law.
Hashtag Sweeney-in-law. Yes. So, thank you for watching, as always.
Indeed.
Until next time, you can do all the usual things.
Yes, on the sunny, happy note that we ended up with, we should have rejigged the order and ended up with the Festival of Fun, which is the World Cup.
For now.
Yeah, or Brexit, the Festival of something.
Great. Thank you for watching, everyone.
Yeah, like, subscribe, do all those things.
Mark.
I know.
Really are.
Hashtag us, app us, third-party app us.
Yes.
Is this right? Yay!
All the right things. Thumbs up from
retweet, Facebook us, Amazon us, eBay.
Facebook is so last year, Mark.
No, sorry. Google us. Anything
Until
else?
next time.
Use that computer.